What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. If you guys are new to the channel, my name is Christian and I have a 370Z and also a Q50 twin turbo. So if you guys are interested in watching more videos, make sure to subscribe to my channel. In this video I'm going to be talking about the air suspension that's actually done to the 370Z. The car has been through a few phases. I have done a few things here and there. I want to talk about the air suspension, how it's been treating me, if I've had any issues with it, since I've pretty much had it. So let me go ahead and show you guys the 370Z. All right, guys, so here's my 2009 Nissan 370Z. I've had this car for about 3 years and it's been on air suspension for most likely about 2, maybe a little bit more. Now with the air suspension, I did install the air suspension myself. I do have a video on it if you guys are interested in checking it out. I pretty much went into detail how you have to do everything on the front struts, the rear struts. The rear is a little bit more complicated. The front, they just pretty much bolt on. There's brackets so you can install it, so it's super easy. For the rear, there's 2 parts to it. At the front, it is a like true coilover, where one piece you have 2 separate pieces where the airbag is separated from the strut. For the rear, you do have to drill a hole at the bottom and you have to put in a thread where it attaches to it. Now the only issue that I had with the air suspension was actually kind of my fault. For the right side, driver's side, one of the lines bursted because it was rubbing on the tire when it would air out and it would kind of smash it on the control arm. So I had to relocate it behind the fender. So I'll open the hood for you guys. Now I'm not sure if you guys will be able to see, but I used to have the line running through here and it would go down, and then that's when we had the problem. It goes down through here, it's pretty much touching the tire when it airs out completely, so it was causing problems. What I had to do instead was I ran the line through the firewall. So here's the line right here, it's not touching any heat or anything. It goes down and then it goes behind the fender, goes inside, and then it goes behind the fender walls or the fender liners, so it's not touching anything. That was another way of rerouting it, but other than that, everything is pretty much ran inside of the interior. So the lines, this one goes inside the firewall in here, and then it goes down, ran through here, and then it goes all the way to the back. Take off all the panels in order to install it, and then it's ran into my trunk setup. And then for the rear, there is a grommet inside the trunk where it goes up, and then you're able to pretty much install it into your manifold. So the manifold is in the back and it's actually at the top, it's not hitting under the tire. I still have my tire on there. You can pretty much do your trunk setup however you want to. I did mine where I still have access to it, or I can use it whenever I need it, just in case I have a flat tire or anything. You guys can also run things like these. These are fittings to be able to add it in between a line. For example, if it like ripped or broke, by just cutting it and then putting this in there, that way you can attach it again. Just in case something like that happens to your car, you can add fittings. I do have several in the back from when I did my air suspension setup. It's ran inside, it's not touching anything on the outside. There's no possibility of something ripping. Most people run it like under the car where it can possibly be damaged by either rocks or even touching something. I ran mine inside where it's a lot safer, where you're not going to have any problems. If you want to run air suspension, I highly suggest doing it inside. Like I said, I have a video on it. It is one of my first videos that I made, so it's not the best. I was still getting kind of used to being in front of like the camera and everything. Well, I might do it again where I go over the air suspension and how it's installed and everything. Other than the issue that I had with the front driver's side airline, I did have a few issues with some fittings that I had purchased. I'll show you guys a picture here of the ones that I had purchased first and the ones after that were actually functional. The first ones would cause leaks, where if you put the line in over time, it would usually have the car kind of go down, it would leak air. And then when I purchased these other fittings, I never had that issue anymore. So even a small issue like that, like fittings that you purchase, could cause problems as well. The air suspension has been perfectly fine, no issues at all, been flawless. The only issues that I've had is with things that I've actually done to the car. I've done it correctly. For example, the airline, that was my fault, and the fittings, I just purchased some new ones and they worked perfectly fine. Even a line not being cut straight will cause issues, so just make sure when you are installing it that you make sure everything's cut perfectly, that there's no like grooves inside the airline or anything wrong that could cause an air leak. But if you want to just have air suspension where you want to make the car look a lot better, this is definitely the way to go. It makes a huge difference when you're able to air out. And then what a lot of people find it amusing, especially like little kids, people that go to car schools that are interested in cars, love air suspension, And especially if you're driving and you drive up to somebody that doesn't know anything about air suspension and you just go like a little bit down, they'll kind of like look at you weird. It's super cool. It makes the car look a lot better, and also it's very convenient because if you're static, I used to be static, I used to have K-Sport coilovers, so whenever I would have to go over bumps, I was always scraping, I was always hitting the fenders on the side. There's still a lot of issues with the car. Eventually something's gonna break if you're static, but with air suspension you don't have that issue. You can go up at any time, you can raise your ride height if you're going over like a very bumpy road where it's just constantly moving everything. It's really convenient for you and it helps out a lot. So it's one of my favorite things that I've done to the car, and it just rides smooth as well. Like I've had no issues. It pretty much rides almost the same as coilovers. It's not bumpy or anything, it rides really smooth. One thing that I do suggest that you guys do, you don't have to do it constantly, you can check every once in a while, like maybe every once a month. Check to see if there's any water in the air tank, because water will build up that may cause issues in your manifold. The good thing about my system is when I bought the air suspension, it came with like a bleeder for me to bleed out any air that's at the bottom of the tank. So just make sure that if you do have air suspension, you're constantly checking to make sure there's any water buildup in your tank, because if that gets into your manifold, that's obviously going to cause some issues with the manifold working properly. All right, so this is the connection that goes under the tank in order to be able to bleed out the water. So this is like a bigger one in order to bleed out the tank rapidly, and then this one is kind of like a little slow one, but this is the one that I used to drain out any water. So if I push this right here, you guys will see a little bit of water come out. See if you guys can see that. I haven't drained the tank in a few weeks, so that's why you're seeing some water coming out. So you want to do this every once in a while. So if you don't have one of these, I highly recommend purchasing one if it didn't come with your kit. Mine actually came with the kit, so I didn't have to purchase an extra one. But as you can see, it's just like a T-fitting, goes connected directly to the tank, and you're able to drain it if you need to. Get all the air out of the tank. It's also a rapid way to get all of the air out of the tank as well. If you run into an emergency, we need to take everything out. That way, you have a way of taking out all the air. In my opinion, it's always better to do air suspension yourself, just because you know how everything is done. The manifold does come with warranty, as long as you don't remove the sticker at the bottom. It does come with a sticker to kind of seal it. If you take that off, it kind of voids your warranty, so just make sure you keep that on there. You don't remove it at any time. It's one of the best mods that you can really do to your car, and honestly, after I went to air suspension, I don't really ever want to go back to it. To me, I don't like to scrape my car. I want everything to be super clean, just in case I ever want to sell it. I want to make sure that everything's perfectly fine, there's no issues with the car, and you don't mess up anything pretty much, because when you're static, you always run a risk of messing up your oil pan, messing up your splitters if you have any splitters, messing up anything on the side. So it's just a lot of stuff that you can go wrong with static. I've gone to a few mountain runs. The car has held up perfectly fine. It never gave me any issues where like the lines explode or the airbags explode. I think I've even gone over 130 with this thing just to see how it would do, and it was perfectly fine. I had no issues at all. So air suspension is perfectly safe, but it also depends on the brand that you go with. Now the airless suspension is plug and play. I have installed other air suspension on different cars. I did do a G35 before. I have a video on it as well if you guys want to check it out. That brand was actually True Heart. And if you compare True Heart to air suspension or airless suspension has a way better build quality than True Heart does. Now the reason I say this is because if you look at air suspension and you compare the strut from air suspension, they have brackets for the brake lines. The welds on the actual strut are really well made, really well built, as where True Heart, it has like the welds are kind of like messy. It doesn't look very well built, and the quality of the actual strut doesn't feel the same either. And then the bags as well, the bags itself didn't feel the same. The ones on the airlift did feel a little bit thicker, as where the True Hearts didn't feel as thick in comparison. So you also have to be mindful of the kind of air suspension that you get. If you go with the cheap brand, it might not be the same, and it might not hold up the same. When it comes to things that I dislike about the air suspension, I can only think of one, which is going to be the compressor and where it's located. You can try to minimize the amount of sound that comes from it, but it's almost unbearable. Like there's no way that you're going to be able to try to minimize the sound that much just because it's so close to your ear. So if you guys can't really see, I'll show you guys a picture, but the compressor is like right there, and it's right like next to my ear, and I can hear it whenever it turns on. It's extremely loud. I'll go ahead and turn it on right now so you guys can hear it. So as you guys can pretty much hear, it is extremely loud. Like you can't talk to really anybody. Like you have to wait, especially if I'm doing videos. You can clearly hear the compressor. The only way you can try to reduce the amount of sound is by putting in the placement of the wheel and kind of relocating it there. I have it at the top, so I can't really relocate it anywhere. I can put it under, but I want to keep my tire there just in case I ever need it for an emergency purpose. So that's the only pet peeve that I really have with the air suspension, that it's extremely loud, but there's nothing that you can really do about it. It is a little bit more bearable with other cars. For example, like a G37, for example, a sedan, you have a seat and then you have the trunk that is covering it. So you will be able to hear a lot more than what I would, because I have the compressor right here, so it's extremely hard to hear. But the compressor is only on for a certain amount of time in order to fill up the tank. So it's only on for a few seconds, depending on if you have two compressors, if you have one. Now this may be different for other people. You may not have this issue because you have a sedan, so it's like all the way in the back, you can't really hear it that much. So with me, that's the only issue that I really had. But other than that, that's not really a problem because it does go away. It's not on consistently. It's only on when I need to fill up the tank or when I air up or down. Do I recommend airless suspension? Absolutely. As you guys can see, I have had no issues with the air suspension. Everything that has happened is either my fault or has been little components that have caused issues. I 100% think that you guys should get it. Of course, this is dependent on if you guys are really more track oriented, drift oriented, or if you're more like to the style of looking good and being stanced and things like that. That's going to be really up to you. My Q50 is actually static right now. It is on coilovers. I do want to transition it over to bags as well. That's something I plan on doing in the future. But of course, it is a lot of money. You're talking about 4K for bags on a car. That's usually around the price range, so it is quite expensive. But I still recommend it, and it's a great buy, honestly. That's pretty much going to conclude the video. I hope you guys found it really useful. Helps you guys decide if you guys want to go on air suspension. I know some people say that they have issues with their air suspension, but with me, has not been the case since I've been having my car. I believe it just depends on how you install it, how you treat it, how you maintenance it, and make sure everything's good. You should have no problems. But other than that, hope you guys found the video useful. Make sure you guys like, subscribe, hit that bell notification, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.